Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to, episode number 15 of the Nasty Metal Podcast. Alright, so what do we have at least lined up for this episode here? For episode number 15? Well, I'm going to at least run through quickly because I have nothing else planned out for the rest of the weeks, but I do have something planned out for next week, so I will be giving out at least next week's planned scheduled content. Then I will then get into, the very first album review here for the Nasty Metal Podcast. Going to change it up, and it's for a particular album that I was able to get around to listening to. Yes, though I listened to it on the internet, I just wanted to at least listen to it, and so I can at least get. And I was planning this already. Let me drink some of my orange juice for a bit. No, there's no booze in it. No booze in it. Because a lot of people like to throw booze in their orange juice. Anyways, I was planning on this anyways, but it's for a particular album, reunion album though, in name it is, and I don't know, you might be taking at least some guesses or thinking what album could I be alluding to. Well, I will address it, or at least we'll get to it, or at least I will name the album when it comes to it, because it will be very shortly here. It will be very shortly, but still, it's just one of those I just wanted to at least just check out, just to see on for my curiosity and see on how it turned out and what it is. Even though it's one of the songs, just it didn't really sit well with me, and it's mostly from the vocal department. I know I'm starting to now give away a little bit too much, but I just wanted to, and I will give you my thoughts, my honest thoughts on this particular album. But that's what I got lined up here as a review, and then finally after it I'll get into a Q&A, since the last episode, which was episode number 14, didn't have a Q&A segment. So finally coming back, and it's at least a question from one of my favorite subscribers for sure. Alright, what else? I guess that's where we then lead into. So let's just, this is what I have lined up. So without further ado, let's get into all of this stuff. Let's get into the topics. And who knows, I might briefly talk about some other topics maybe, but let's see how quickly I can run through this stuff. Alright, so first, let's get through what's going to be next week's scheduled content. I know I did announce what is going to be next week's Album of the Week episode, which will be out on Monday. I did announce it on the last Album of the Week episode, which was for Spellbound from Tigers of Pantang. At the end of it, I did announce what it was going to be, and that's the debut full-length album, studio album from New Wave or British Heavy Metal legends, Vardis, with The World's Insane. And then, of course, for Wednesday's review, since I did promise, I'm going to now, again, bringing back the Wednesday review for being stuff for, again, all dedicated to Soul Grinder Zine. So the first review is the 4-way split CD. That will be out Wednesday from my review of this one. And then, of course, on Friday, it will be, for right now, it is the debut album from the Swedish metal band, is Colony from Starscape. Because I've seen some people kind of talk about some of it, and I did briefly listen to some of it, but I really want to give it a full listen so I can at least give my honest thoughts on this, and I might briefly run through some of the, just the online opinions on about it, and what I think about some of those online opinions. So that is going to be at least for Friday's review, so there you go. That's at least is next week's scheduled content. Nothing out on Saturday. So, there we go. Monday, Album of the Week episode number, I think, 108, I believe. Vardis's debut studio album, The World's Insane. Wednesday, Soul Grinder Zine, 4-way split CD, and then Friday, Colony from Starscape. So there you go. There is that is next week's scheduled content. All right. Let's now get into the very first album review album reviews segment for episode number, or just for Nasty Metal Podcast. So what is going to be the debut album review for this one? And will I ever do any more album reviews for this? Well, it depends on which ones I pick. What will fit. And this one is because of, I think I've got some negatives about this one. It is, in name, the return of Agent Steel, No Other Gods Before Me, which was released on March 19th through Dissonance Productions, though it was pushed back to at least a year because of it was once planned to be released last year, but that didn't happen. So here it is finally. It came out March 19th. Oh, wow. Where do I begin? Since, of course, on the very first, it's a great that I am for sure revisiting the topic of John Cyrus, because of this was actually the topic, the whole BS between John Cyrus or his son and the guy of Riot City. Yeah, it was that whole debacle around the festival there. Was, I think, Up the Hammers, it might have been. Or, I actually already forgot what was the whole thing. I forgot about it. Let me kind of go and look back, because it was just absolutely hilarious, a lot of this. It was just fucking hilarious. But, goddamn. The whole debacle between all of that, with the festival and so on, and then just the whole of that. You go back and watch the first episode of the Nasty Metal Podcast so you can at least hear my thoughts on that whole thing. But so finally, it's great to revisit it, but now it is now down to business, because of it was still them because of that first episode that I think, again, I might have also brought up that a Agent Steel album with just John Cyrus and a bunch of hired guys was going to release an album. Then he pushed it back. So finally it's here, and so it just makes more sense for me to at least to review it as a part of a Nasty Metal Podcast instead of as an actual episode on its own. Though eventually, right now, you'll probably also seeing this as a separate episode in some cases, which gets somewhat gets inspired by the Jim Cornette Experience, where some of the little bits on where his reviews of certain matches gets uploaded after the podcast gets uploaded. So it's bits. So some of this gets inspired by that in this way. So let's just begin. Let's begin. No Other Gods Before Me. The first album with first Agent Steel album with John Cyrus on vocals since Unstoppable Force from 1987. Yes, and of course I did review some of the Agent Steel albums anyways on this channel as a part of US Power Metal Month, because I do in some cases consider Agent Steel at times being a band that really borders on this sort of US Power Metal sound than just straight up thrash metal or speed metal. They always had a way of being very melodic. Especially when it comes to a vocalist like John Cyrus, who I thought was a great vocalist, and in some cases I would throw in that sort of combination between Jeff Tate and King Diamond. Some of it between the difference of the two. He was very similar, but he had his own unique vibrato, and he was always one of the standouts on those first two albums, and even the EP, the Mad Locust Rising EP. And so since then, there was always reunions, there was always said to, but he would either were back out of it, and again, it just became ridiculous to where they had to, of course, get a new guy in, Bruce Hall, to kind of go at, which, again, being Bernie Versailles and Juan Garcia. So there was always issues with John Cyrus. There was always issues. So finally, after I think years of just giving up on Juan Garcia and Bernie Verceles and them on just continuing with the Agent Steel name, in some cases, I think because of John Cyrus made a stink about that. Why are they going around using the name when he's not a part of it? He pulled that fucking card plenty of times. He pulled that card, and finally, now it's his. It's his band. It's almost in a scenario if Jeff Tate was able to successfully get rights to the Queensryche name. So here it is. And so finally, he's able to now do whatever he wants with the name, and he decided to go with a whole bunch of new guys. So really, you don't have Bernie Verceles on this album. You don't have Juan Garcia on guitar. You definitely don't have Kurt Kofeld, who will go on the form Holy Terror. You don't even have any other original members like George Cobb or Chuck Profess. You have none of these guys on this album. None of them. None of them are on here. Or even Mike Zapatil. You don't have any of these guys. Or even at least anyone who played on during the Bruce Hall era of Agent Steel. You have none of these. None of these guys are on this album. It's just guys from other different countries. They like either Brazil. Let's see who the guitar player here is also from. One from Bulgaria. Where's the bassist from? He's from Japan. And who is the drummer from? Denmark. It's almost for guys from different countries. Of course, John Cyrus, even though he was here in the United States, he was from Brazil. And so he came from here to the United States, so I guess he wanted to keep it very almost regional, or in some cases very European. It seemed like he wanted to keep it that way. But at the same time, when listening to this album, musically, it is Agent Steel in sound, but at the same time, it's not really Agent Steel in its true form or lineup. I mean, John Cyrus is the only anything that's tied to any of the original albums. I know that there's probably going to be a few people here that's probably going to at least say, well, didn't you like those Molly Hatchet albums without most of the original members? Well, I will at least elaborate on that. But right now, let's just run through the track listing because I don't want to go on through, because I want to get through all of my thoughts and all of my sort of elaborate, just all of my thoughts and so on here. So let's just run through this. We have at least 11 songs here. It all clocks in at 40 minutes and 33 seconds. So these 11 songs are Passage to Afron V, Crypts of Galactic Damnation, No Other Gods, so that's probably the title track, Trespassers, The Devil's Greatest Trick, Santa Cosmica, Veterans of Disaster, Carousel of Vagrant Souls, The Incident, Outer Space Connection, and then finally ending with Entrance to Afro V. Yeah, or Afron V. I want to hit Afro V. Oh god, that's probably gonna get me in some big trouble there, and I apologize. I don't want to try and make that sound like I'm actually a racist. Okay, don't try and pull that. I'm obviously looking at it, and I accidentally forgot that it said Afron because of the first track is Passage to Afron V, and the last track is titled Entrance to Afron V. Passage and Entrance. Is that the same fucking word? Isn't that almost the same fucking meaning? Passage and entrance. What the fuck? Would it be exit to Afron V? Or whatever fucking other planet? You know what? Be quite honest, I think he did go to another planet for all those years. He did get fucking abducted. Goddamn asshole. He did get abducted. Or because of, since the album title is titled No Other Gods Before Me, I guess all the fucking other gods decided to get on the Bifrost Bridge to another realm so they can get away from this fucking guy. Which also, in some cases, probably makes sense. He didn't really vanish. John Cyrus didn't just vanish off the face of the earth. All the rest of the members just left him. They left him in some other fucking place, so they didn't want to be near him. So there you go. fucking idiot. So there you go. Jesus Christ. Where do I really fucking begin? Let's just begin with the very first track here, Passage to Afron V. It's just another sort of continuation of the very first track, the intro track on Skeptic's Apocalypse. But it's just redundant. And at the time, I was like thinking, is this really an actual song, or is this really just the fucking intro? And to be quite honest, it's a pointless fucking intro. Didn't deserve to be on a damn album like this. It's just freaking John Cyrus stroking his own ego, thinking he's actually a great fucking songwriter. And I've seen already a post on a particular, was it the unpopular opinions thread on Revelation of Doom forum, and someone was basically making the argument that intros or interludes or whatnot are just pointless and don't deserve to be it. If you're going to add, apparently if you're going to add any intros or interludes, then maybe you need to be a better songwriter, because it doesn't make you a good songwriter. It just makes you fucking pretentious, and that's how this whole entire thing comes off of. That's the sort of impression I'm getting. John Cyrus is fucking pretentious as shit. And after that, though, we then finally get to the actual track, which is Crypts of Galactic Damnation. And from this track to at least Outer Space Connection, as much as these guys ain't the original members, this is in some cases a great tribute to at least this sort of classic Agent Steel sound, because of it actually becomes enjoyable. Alright, for the most part, this is actually an enjoyable album, and from at least from a musical standpoint. Because most of the guitar players and the musicians, they've done a good job recapturing a little bit of that classic Agent Steel sound that you hear in albums like Skeptic's Apocalypse and Step of Force in some cases. Though I don't really get a whole lot of Mad Locust Rising sort of comparisons, or at least any feels or vibes, because there's not any song that's anywhere close to being absolutely ridiculously fast and aggressive, or just bonkers like the track Mad Locust Rising, which is just ludicrous in its fast pace and its riffs. It's just goddamn, but it's one of my favorite songs. So there's nothing that comes close to that. But really recapturing the sound like Skeptic's Apocalypse and Unstoppable Force, musically wise, the members in the band, besides John Cyrus, do a decent job. So there's at least my positives for this album. But as my negatives, the only really, besides some of the intro and the fucking outro, I mean, it's just pointless. And in some cases, entrance to Afron V is almost an interlude. Because by the time Outer Space Connection is done, I was even surprised that was even that there was even a fucking 11th song, because everything just runs through to each other. Again, interlude. So it's just an interlude that got separated to being a final track, to where it's like, hey, it's an outro. It's a fucking outro. Fuck you. That's absolutely pointless. So, and again, you're not a fucking prog master like anyone from the goddamn 70s. So, it's fucking pretentious. So, those are really other negatives, but the other negative that I have for here is John Cyrus. Vocally, when I first hear him, he's not sounding nearly as unbearable as he was on the first single, which is The Devil's Greatest Trick. He's not sounding as unbearable. In some cases, it was almost like, hey, you know what? It's kind of nice hearing John Cyrus again. But then towards the other track, when he starts to really hit it, and what's his age right now? What's his fucking age? I'm going to at least look at here. What's his age? He's 58 years old. And for his age, while guys like King Diamond, or again, in some cases, even Bruce Dickinson or Rob Halford, or some of these guys, Biff Byford, they're able to at least to hit some notes, but sometimes you could tell they're of their age, but at the same time, they still do a good job on really kind of covering up some of their age. and where it's almost crazy to think that they're even at that age. But John Cyrus, it's almost at times you'll be thinking, wow, it's kind of crazy that he's even 58 years old. But then when it comes to close of some of the songs, when he starts to hit some of those notes, it's like painfully obvious of what his age is, because he's trying so hard to hit some of those old notes that he was able to hit when he was much younger on those classic albums. But my God, there's some parts where it almost sounds like he's almost like crying like a little baby, because it's like, what the fuck? And of course, he's adding in other sort of special effects. He's even adding some more vocal layering and some song where it's almost half the time you can hear what the fuck he's even saying, because it's like a complete barrage of just vocals after vocals after vocals, and half the time they get buried by half the fucking the guitars and the other instruments. And there's another complaint: the mixing of this album. It actually is not a bad sounding mix. It sounds in some cases pretty good, but John Cyrus just absolutely gets buried, and half the time I almost end up tuning him out because I'm mostly paying attention most of the riffs than I am to John Cyrus, which wasn't ever a fucking case in any of the earlier albums. So why is it such a big issue? Was he the one in charge of actually producing this? What the fuck? It's absolutely ludicrous that how much of an ego that John Cyrus has, that he thought he could continue it, but in some cases, I think he's done more to tarnish the name than he has to actually at least pay respect to it. And it's sad, because musically, some of this is not too bad. But John Cyrus, at this point, I'm like, after this album, this should be the last one. I mean, from the title and so on, I'm sorry, but the fact that you think that you're this much of a god, because yes, I mean, why would you even title the album No Other Gods Before Me? You really think you're this fucking hot as a singer when you basically left? It's like the freaking, the Lance Archer issue here. You do a match, you're in the main event, but then you're now all of a sudden afterwards, you're now gone. You leave. You're no longer there. You ain't going to stay up, but you complain about that you need to be in the big spot when you leave every time. So that's the same case with the John Cyrus. He wants to be a part of Agent Steel. He wants to be a part of the scene. But then he leaves afterwards because he can't handle the scene. And so now he wants to come back to it. So I'll bet you that after all the shit he's pulled with the promoters and whatnot on all these festivals and just being an absolute malcontent piece of shit, he's probably going to run off again and leave some of these young guys who we just fucking hired, and it's going to leave them in the dust because of he couldn't do it anymore. He can't hang up with any of these younger bands, or even the older ones who are still going around. I mean, goddamn. Saxon, still going because they never split up. No one, even Lemmy, for all the years he had with Motorhead, even with all the different lineups, it still was a well-oiled machine. John Cyrus just wasn't built for this environment. He wasn't built for this. And so now he thinks he is built for this because of he just wants to rub it into some of these other members because of he wanted to keep the Agent Steel name because he's got an ego. And so now this whole entire album, in many ways, it's stroking it. And I'm sorry, but in the end of the day, this album shouldn't almost exist. It shouldn't even exist. It's lucky that he even was able to put this album out. And that he's lucky that there are some people that still went out to buy this, because there are still a lot of diehard Agent Steel fans. But at the same time, I think he's done more to hurt some of his reputation than he is in actually at least making his reputation look better, on keeping a good image. Again, I don't have to really reiterate the issue with fucking Riot City and that whole debacle with the festival. I don't need to. I think it's just completely sad how in some cases it's something to use the word how the mighty have fallen. But in this case with John Cyrus, since he never really had much of a big career as some of his other contemporaries that was on Combat Records, Megadeth, or maybe even on Megaforce, and since he did actually play with Overkill, yeah, or Exodus, those guys at least fought on. They pushed hard to kind of go along, to go into it, to keep it at least. And in some cases, look where the career is now. He just didn't have it. So I can't really use the word how the mighty have fallen because he never was mighty to begin with. Even if he may have, at least he had a good voice in some cases, but he didn't get to have that sort of same, in many cases, the same identification or that same sort of longevity as any of those guys because of he took his ball and he ran. I know this is harsh, and I know you're probably going to say, well, where have you been? I'm sorry, but when you're looking at the facts and you look how the career of John Cyrus, it does not measure up to any of the other guys that came out in the fucking 1980s that were in the metal scene. Again, doesn't. King Diamond, he still kept going. He never really quit, even if he was with either Merciful Fate or even a solo band. He still kept going. He still loved it. The thing is, John Cyrus didn't love it like they did, and that's where he is right now, and he can't stand it. It's a hard pill for him to swallow, so he has to fucking go along and tarnish shit. So, at least with Jeff Tate, he at least had, in some cases, the musical muscle to pull off the sort of egotistical sort of mind that he did. And in some cases now, he's actually starting to smarten up and lighten up that he kind of fucked up. I've noticed. I've heard him actually say he's actually somewhat fucked up on, and that it shouldn't have ended the way that it did between him and the guys on Queensryche. So he's kind of at least realized where his faults was. John Cyrus is not going to realize where his faults was. And it's probably going to take him, I guess, 20 more years for him to realize where he fucking faulted in life. And with this one, it comes off. So, musically, this isn't really a bad album. But I wished it was with someone else under the vocal helm instead of that. And I wished it wasn't under the Agent Steel name. Because of, this is a very good Agent Steel tribute-sounding album. But it's really not worthy of the Agent Steel name. At least when it came to Molly Hatchet and those guys that weren't at least most of the original members, there was at least a difference in sound compared to some of those other albums where it almost sounded like a different band. Here, you can tell this is a band that wants to sound like Agent Steel, but it's not really Agent Steel, but the only person, at least a name, that is tied to Agent Steel is just John Cyrus. I don't think he just has anymore. So I apologize. Some are actually find this to be the biggest negative and think that I should rethink some of this stuff. I'm sorry, but the fact that any people will say that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread should at least rethink their opinions on what they think of this album, because of nothing about this album is fantastic. I mean, I've seen plenty of other bands that have reunited, that have put out much more stronger work than this. It's good, but it's not really amazing. Again, I think probably the biggest fallbacks on this album is John Cyrus. I wish they had someone else, because of he's obviously doing too much at the same time, and in some cases it kind of hurts some of the album here. Again, I would have loved this more if you had a guy that actually really cared, because I don't think he cares. He's just doing this because he wants the attention, he wants the notoriety, he wants the fucking gratitude, he wants all of it. And I'm sorry, but this is not making me think that you deserve any sort of fucking gratitude. You should have stayed in the fucking in the metal scene. You should have stayed in it, because if you did, I would actually wouldn't be using some of my arguments about some of them. I wouldn't be using any of my arguments here. I wouldn't be. So, there. So, where do I go from here? Where do I now? I've already given at least my honest, brutal thoughts on this album. So where do I stand? What is my verdict? What's my rating? I'm actually going to be even though I showed a lot of brutal thoughts, but it was mostly directed towards John Cyrus and how I feel that he doesn't deserve any sort of the accolades because he never really did anything to work hard to even deserve any of those accolades. He didn't do much to really get any of to really deserve that he should deserve those accolades. He didn't stay around for too long. So, as brutal, those are just more towards that, and in some cases a little bit the pretentiousness of having fucking passage to Afron V and entrance to Afron V, which adds nothing to the album, which added nothing to the album, just other than, here, I just need something to fill up space, because I need filler. I need to get it to at least being 40 minutes, because if I just had all these, it would have been a little under 30, which would have been perfect! God damn you, idiot. Either way, what is my verdict? What's my rating? Again, I'm going to be a little light here. I'm not going to be, it's going to be surprising, but I'm going to ease up a bit. Because I'm going to give it at least a 6.15 out of 10. Because of, again, I can hear there's at least something here that's decent, but the biggest drawback that keeps it from getting anywhere close to a 8 or a 9, especially anywhere near a 10, is John Cyrus. And even in some cases, he's not the worst here. Again, I've heard worse vocal performances, but at the same time, after this album, I went back and I listened to the Mad Locust Rising EP because I needed something to remind me of when he was really good. Again, I know it's going to be, but he's 58 years old. I made that argument earlier. There are guys who are that are the age of 58. You look at, Brian Ross of Satan, or Blitzkrieg, and those other new wave of British metal bands that he was in. He still can pull off the fucking vocals. Look at goddamn James Rivera of Hellstar. He can still hit those notes without flawlessly. But John Cyrus, he struggles with trying to hit some of those notes, and he has to add in vocal effects to hide his faults. And in some cases, I think is where it becomes to where I have to use the argument that I think in some cases it's sad. It's sad that he has to actually retort to using a vocal layering on top of that because of he can't just accept that he's not at the strengths that he was before, and he has to push his limits. Guys like, again, there are other guys that know where their limits are, and they're able to at least to work around those limits and make it work. He didn't really understand it because he thinks he's still in his 20s. He still thinks he's in his 20s. And he isn't. So, I'm sorry. That, in some cases, it hurts this album, and it's why I've knocked it to at least, again, fair enough to at least a 6.15. Because I'm not really judging the rest of the band here. I'm just judging most of where the songs are in some cases, or even unnecessary songs that don't have to be in here in terms of the mixing, and of course John Cyrus. So basically the vocal department. That's what I'm judging. The musical guys here that are in the band, they're good. They're good. But John Cyrus just brings these guys down, and I think they would benefit better from a different guy. That's where I'm at. If you want to hear a band that is great with at least a vocalist who in some cases might be similar to John Cyrus, Vulture. I'm sorry, but I think in some cases Vulture have done a much better job of really coming up with a sound that's similar to bands like Agent Steel and Hellstar, or some of these great sort of classic US speed metal / kind of almost power thrash metal kind of bands that was on Combat or Metal Blade. I think, again, Vulture is a great band. I think does a great job. And in terms of the production, the album Ghastly Waves and Battered Graves has a fantastic production. Even if it is trying to sound really in a great way, it really recaptures the production and the overall essence of that sort of period of like 1986 and 1987. It has perfect mixing and production compared to this album. At least fucking the singer on Vulture, he's really up front. You can hear him and he hits great. And there might be some vocal effects, but it's done where it's supposed to be done. And John Cyrus just didn't take any of that. So he didn't at least learn from that. So that's where I'm at. So I wouldn't say this is the worst album of 2021, but it's not the greatest album of 2021. This is probably the most, the most I've come back to, at least, to really showing some negatives on an album, where it actually comes up where I think I've given out the first negative review in a long time. So there we go. So I'm going to end here. This is where everything ends here. So let's now move on. There's the first album review for the Nasty Metal podcast. So without further ado, let me then now run into the next segment, which is the final segment here. So because I did babble on, because again, I'm blown away by just the audacity of John Cyrus. I'm thinking how he needed to continue with the fucking Agent Steel name, that he was that worthy of continuing with it, when it should have just been left buried in the dust. Should have ended with the Bruce Hall era, and that's what, and it would have been perfect. This album would have worked well if this was under his own name, but it would have worked better under John Cyrus's own name instead of just Agent Steel. And maybe I would have looked at that, but still I probably would have had some complaints about it. Still though, let's just run into the next segment, which is the Q&A segment. And this, of course, is brought to you by my favorite subscriber, that being Stormrider. And so let's see what Stormrider, at least what the questions Stormrider has for me. Alright, so this was, of course, again, great timing, because of this was, again, today, very much around 5:32 a.m. This was sent to me through Messenger. So my Facebook Messenger. So this comes from Stormrider. So here we go. My question for the Q&A segment section of the podcast. 1. What are the 5 or 10 metal rock albums that you think sound the best sonically, and why? 2. What is your favorite format, vinyl, CD, cassette, stream, for listening to music, and why? Take care. Before I really answer number 1, because that one's going to take some time, I'm going to answer question number 2, which is basically what is my favorite format? Basically, again, vinyl, CD, cassette, streaming for listening to music. I'm going to answer that one because this is the quickest one. I'm going to really, I know a lot of people love vinyl, and I do like vinyl. That's actually my second favorite format, but my favorite format is CD because it's actually the easiest, and you can take care better of a CD that times than really of a vinyl. Because with vinyl, again, even though I love the sound of vinyl, I do like it. It's a little nostalgic because, again, while I didn't really grow up in the 1970s or 1980s, the thing is, what really interested me in the vinyl format was when my dad actually brought out his copy of Screaming for Vengeance of Judas Priest, and then, of course, High Voltage by AC/DC. He played those two records a lot, and it's where I think I began appreciation for the format. And then after that, looking to some of his records, you would throw on like Love Drive by Scorpions, and then Power Edge by AC/DC. Because of the cassette, even though I had found the cassette and wanted to listen to it, eventually he brought out his vinyl copy, and I was able to listen to that. And so and of course, great album. Though it is one of my favorite AC/DC records, but that's one of the reasons why I think I became so in love with it. And eventually, getting on CD, I was able to love it even more and more, and continue that loving, at least, just relationship with that album. So again, able to listen to it on my CD player wherever I go when I was going on out to school. So that's the thing with CDs. when I got my first CD player for Christmas, I was able to listen to a lot of some of those CDs, and in some cases, that's one thing I loved. It was, in many ways, it was the next step from cassette, but I think it was much better sound overall, and in some cases, you had even more of the power to skip songs, and you also, in some cases, had better sound quality compared to, at least in some cases, either vinyl or cassette. The only thing that became the biggest argument between CD and vinyl is like when it came to remastered albums. A lot of people really argued about how remastered albums butchered more of the sound of the original albums and really actually enhancing the sound and making it, at least in some cases, making it sound better. In some cases, or just improving certain albums. And I think in some cases it worked for certain, but for other albums that sounded great from the beginning, some thought it was unnecessary for an album to be remastered. And so that's why many people began to go along with their argument that, well, vinyl was better because of it. The sound was already retained, even though they forget that some albums over certain different pressings were mastered differently and had a different sound, or at least different loudness or brightness in its sound. So people forget about that too when it came to represses. They also did some of that too. So I can see the argument, but again, one of the biggest differences with CD, every time you played it, it always sounded the same. Of course, with vinyl, how many times you wore those grooves out, you can tell, you can hear the difference in the awareness of those grooves, where it begins with the louder surface noise or the crackling, and of course the pops. Everything gets created, and that's also due to depending on what record player you have, and that's another problem when it comes to the sound systems. Sometimes with CD, even if you got probably the most shittiest sound system, you can still crank up the fucking music and it will still sound good. But with vinyl, because of now, sometimes you really need to pay money for at least great sound cartridges. That becomes a problem because of not everyone has the money to really buy the best sound system, so they're usually buying the cheapest stuff, which can be a problem because it's going to ruin the record. So that's probably the biggest cons for me with records, is some of that. And of course, then getting a copy is probably play the shit and skips or jumps. That's another big problem. Or the needle gets bent. But with CD, even if you lightly scratch a CD, it's still going to play. Of course, then there's always cons to certain CDs, but again, there's usually cons to every sort of format. There's always cons, pros and cons. And I think, though, if I'm going to, I think CD and vinyl are probably two of my favorite formats. Cassette, the biggest problem with cassette, even though I don't hate the format, I do mind the format, and I don't mind the format, I think I shall say. I don't think it's a terrible format. I do like listening to it. The only problem with cassette is the sound quality isn't always the greatest compared to vinyl CD. It isn't great. But the biggest issue is sometimes if you play a cassette for or at least in a cassette player for too long or too many times, it somehow will magnetize and it will create, it would somehow lessen the sound quality, and it will have to where you have to then pay money to actually fix a cassette player, or two, it's going to eat the tape. And that becomes a problem too, because when it starts eating the tape, if you can be successful in saving the tape from it being completely rippled or crippled, it will still work, but after a while, if it eats it to the point where you have to cut the tape, then it's a lost cause. I know I've heard the trick of placing like either Scotch tape on some of the tape, and it might fix it, but I think that fucks up the sound. And if you're cutting the tape or in strips or whatnot, you're going to then fuck up at least the songs on the tape, and will again it just ruins it. So those are the biggest cons for cassette for me, and why I will never say it is my favorite format. But I don't hate the format. I can listen to it. But on streaming, the biggest problem with streaming, and why I will never say that it's my favorite format, is because of, for one, the quality isn't great. At least, and the thing is, it's always sounds muddy, depending on also And the thing is, with streaming, you have to rely on your internet service, and sometimes, depending on the area you live in, you're probably not going to get the greatest high-speed internet, and that's one of the biggest things, the biggest tools you need in order for streaming to really work. And those are the biggest cons, and the thing is, if you have shitty internet, if it ends up breaking out, like let's say the internet connection breaks out, it then fucks up the quality of the song, or it just stops immediately. And then you have to wait for the internet to come back on in order for at least the song to replay. And then now you just fucked up the experience of listening to an album. And that's my biggest experience. Living up here, the internet is shitty. So I can't really, it's why I prefer physical format, where it be CD, vinyl, and cassette. Because at least with cassette, you don't have to worry about anything stopping. You don't have to, it can still play on, and even if it isn't the greatest sound, you're still able to listen to it all the way through. With vinyl and CD, you're able to listen to it all the way through without any sort of quality breaking. Even skipping is going to be a small factor in compared to the internet and streaming. So there you go. I just broke down my just elaborating on why I think certain formats are great and why I am the way with where I place these formats in my favorites. So yes, I do prefer CD over vinyl, but at the same time, I don't want to knock vinyl down because I do like vinyl. And of course, there's always the issue of certain records that are being priced too much or too high. And that ruins another experience of me wanting to like vinyl at times too. But I've kind of overcome that. So whatever. And not every album that's on vinyl has made it to CD too. So that's another one. And for the albums that haven't made it to CD, it's like Russian roulette. You're either gonna get at least an empty hole, or you're gonna get the bullet. So there you go. So now I just answered your second question. It's time to answer your first question. And that is, what are the 5 or 10 metal/rock albums that you think sound the best sonically, and why? Well, to answer that one, the first sound that really comes to mind is Back in Black from AC/DC. Even it isn't my go-to AC/DC album, the one thing I do like about the album that is great is that it is probably the best sounding record in general. And again, the reason I will make the argument about Back in Black, even I know Bip Bop Boom had talked about how I forgot, was it the Ludwig pressing of Back in Black, I think he said, is like the best sounding version of Back in Black, because it just sounds the best sonically. But I do have to say that though having a remaster of the album, even the remastering for Back in Black, and since I'm playing it on a record player that doesn't have the greatest sound cartridge, it still sounds fantastic. It's alien for how well an album like Back in Black even sounds. Because of, even on CD record, even on remastering, it still sounds great sonically, and somehow, even on the shittiest sound system you have, it still comes out playing great. I can't even come up with the explanation for why it was able to sound that great and why it's able to sound great on any sort of sound cartridge. I can't really explain it. It's ludicrous, but it is. And I can't even, again, it's crazy. But it does, and it's one of the records, if I'm going to test out a sound system, I'm going to bust out the remaster of Back in Black, because again, even for a remaster, even when it's sounding, when he put it on at least through not a very good sound system or sound cartridge, it's going to sound fantastic. Even you can tell it's not the perfect sound, it still sounds great, and it's still able to sound good. And that's how I'm able to test out if a sound cartridge sounds great. You put on a really good sounding sonically sounding good record, and that's why I think Back in Black is probably the album I will definitely would mention first. But any other albums I think sound great sonically? I don't know, but there's something about Melissa by Merciful Fate that I think sounds there's something about it that sounds alien too. Even for an album that's raw, it somehow still sounds great. Though it's not anywhere near the sort of great sonics of Back in Black by AC/DC. Even remastered or not remastered, Melissa sounds fantastic sonically. I don't know how they're able to make an album like that sound good with the budget that those guys had. But it's great. I mean, Kim Ruzz's drumming on it. It's again, in some cases, it's almost similar to like Phil Rudd, his drum tone on Back in Black, or even Flick of the Switch is just fantastic sounding. It's the best drum sound it is, and it's why I think Melissa might be, in some cases, Merciful Fate's Back in Black, because of it's just, in some cases, even sonically, it's some of the best sounding record I think they had. I know a lot of people say don't break the oath, but the thing is, I think they use too much effects and it's too trebly, whereas Melissa just sounded perfect. From the songs to even the production and its mixing and its overall sonics, it was, I think, the best record they really put out, and I think it just sounds fantastic. No matter what pressing I think you have, it still sounds great. So I'm going to making the argument that I think Merciful Fate's Melissa sounds sonically great for what it is. So anything other albums that are coming to mind? Well, really, I can list off 3 more, because I can't go any more further than past 5. Basically, trying to go up to 10 is going to be a little daunting. But really, other albums, trying to think on top of the head, but right now, I would say, one's coming to mind is, for some reason, Power Slave from Iron Maiden. I don't know what it is about Power Slave compared to like Number of the Beast or Peace of Mind or even Killers. I don't know, but something about Power Slave sounds great sonically too. I can't really, even I'm listening to a remastered version, it still sounds good. I don't know what it is about that album, but somehow the mixing or so on, it seems to have the best overall sound in its overall. I mean sonics. We're not going about, which again, remasters takes away sonics. But there's something about when you're comparing certain albums, even in their remastered form, you can tell how great they probably sounded even not remastered. So something about that one just comes to mind. I don't know. It's weird. But I guess that would be my third one. Fourth one, I guess to go by, I would have to say, you know what? I think the fourth one that comes to mind is right now is On Through the Night from Def Leppard, because I've lived with a early CD copy of On Through the Night for years, and for some reason, it sounds good. It's probably, again, it's a great sounding Bob Ludwig is, I think, a great, or was it Lou Lost? I think some of them did work on that album, and it just sounds great. Mastered wise, it's actually a very good. I think it's probably. I've heard the argument that it sounded too clean, but Tom Allom, I think was able to really do. I think he really made Def Leppard sound the best in some cases. He knew how to master some of those albums better, and I think they've never. Because again, High and Dry is a good record, but I think with Mutt Lange, he worked good when he was at AC/DC. But the thing is, afterwards, with all of his different ideas on where to make albums sound and what he wanted to visually think of some of those albums, I think in some cases, High and Dry I think he lost the mark with that one, because of, while it is a good record from Def Leppard, sonically, I don't know if I can say it's, even though it actually does sound pretty loud for an even old CD, it had a really good interesting sound to it, but I think I'll make the argument that I think On Through the Night sounded a lot better sonically compared to High and Dry. That's just my my personal preference there, just my personal opinion. Fifth one, last one's coming to mind since I've lived with this sound for a while now, but it's a new one, but it's a great album. But I do have to say that Electric from the Cult is a very good sounding album sonically. I mean, you can say or make the argument that any of the albums that Rick Rubin had produced, whether it be the first Danzig or Electric from the Cult, are very good albums sonically. So I guess that they are very good sounding albums sonically. Even on CD or on record, they sound great. So I don't know. I guess in some cases, depending on the producer and the master and who you have working with, on some of those songs and the mixing, you really, depending on the team you've got, it really ends up being the factor in some cases. It becomes the big one. You really can, it really makes a difference. So there we go. Those are my picks. All right, those are my picks. So that pretty much answers your first question. So again, I hope that is good for you. Thank you for sending me those questions. Thank you there. So I think this is pretty much it for this episode of the Nasty Metal Podcast. So I hope all of you enjoyed. I'll be back again next month with another with episode number 16 of the Nasty Metal Podcast. If you have any thoughts on any of these topics, you can leave them in the comment section below. So then I hope all of you are also looking forward to next week's scheduled content. So with that, I hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrash Head Sam out. And I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.